Hello everyone, the European Union is at a crossroads. Since its foundation, the EU has evolved from a simple economic cooperation project into a political and economic union, shaping the lives of over 450 million people across 27 member states. But where does the future lie for the EU? Will the coming decades see a push toward deeper integration, where more power is centralized in Brussels? Or will we see a shift back to greater national sovereignty, where individual member states reclaim more control over their own affairs? Today, we'll explore both sides of this debate and examine the potential futures for the EU. To understand where the EU is heading, we need to take a look at how it got there in the first place. The European Union began as a response to the devastation of two world wars, with the aim of creating lasting peace and economic cooperation. The first step came in 1951 with the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, which brought together 6 countries: Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, to manage their coal and steel industries collectively. This economic cooperation grew into the European Economic Community, or EEC, in 1957, where the member states aimed to create a common market. Over the years, the EEC evolved into the European Union with the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, which expanded cooperation beyond economics into areas like justice, security, and foreign policy. Since then, we've seen deeper integration with the introduction of the euro, the expansion of EU membership to include Eastern European countries, and the development of more centralized policies in areas like climate change, trade, and digital regulation. But this process of ever closer union has not been without its critics. Many argue that too much power has shifted to Brussels, eroding national sovereignty. And this brings us to the central question of today's debate. Will the future of the EU involve further integration, or will member states push back in favor of reclaiming more control? Let's start by examining the case for closer union. Proponents of further integration argue that in a rapidly globalizing world, countries can achieve more by working together than by going it alone. And as global challenges like climate change, digital transformation, and international trade become more complex, these advocates believe that the EU needs to strengthen its central institutions to remain competitive and protect the interests of its citizens. One key argument for closer union is economic strength. The EU is the world's largest trading bloc, and its single market is one of the greatest achievements. By removing barriers to trade and creating a common regulatory framework, the EU has allowed businesses to operate more efficiently across borders. Advocates of deeper integration argue that further harmonization of fiscal policies, taxation, and banking regulations would make the EU economy even more resilient and better equipped to deal with future economic crises. Another argument is political influence. As individual countries, member states might struggle to have a strong voice on the global stage, but together, the EU has the power to shape international norms and policies. Whether it's through trade negotiations, environmental agreements, or diplomatic efforts, the EU's collective weight gives it significant leverage in global affairs. And there's also the question of security. In a world where global threats like cyber attacks, terrorism, and geopolitical instability are increasing, a more integrated EU could offer better protection for its citizens. Shared intelligence, border security cooperation, and even discussions around a unified EU defense policy suggest that deeper integration could enhance Europe's stability and ability to respond to threats. Lastly, there's the idealistic vision of European unity. The idea of ever closer union is enshrined in the EU's founding treaties with the belief that deeper integration can foster a shared European identity, promote peace, and prevent conflict. For many, the EU represents a unique experiment in supranational governance that has been crucial to maintaining peace in Europe for over 70 years. On the other side of the debate, we have the argument for more national sovereignty. Critics of deeper integration argue that too much power has already been transferred to Brussels, leaving national governments with less control over key areas like immigration, taxation, and even cultural policies. For these critics, the EU has become too centralized and bureaucratic, imposing regulations that don't always align with the specific needs or values of individual member states. And one of the most prominent examples of this pushback is Brexit. In 2016, the UK voted to leave the EU, driven largely by concerns over national sovereignty. Many Leave campaigners argued that the EU had too much control over British laws and borders, and that leaving the bloc would allow the UK to regain its independence and pursue its own trade deals, immigration policies, and regulations. While Brexit was a major blow to the EU, it has also sparked debates across Europe about whether other member states might follow suit or, at the very least, demand more autonomy within the Union. Eurosceptic movements in countries like Hungary, Poland, and Italy have been vocal about their opposition to deeper integration and have called for the EU to return more powers to national governments. One of the key areas of contention is over immigration and border control. Many member states, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, have been critical of the EU's policies on migration, especially in response to the 2015 refugee crisis. These countries argue that they should have more control over who enters their borders rather than being bound by EU-wide quotas or policies. Another point of resistance comes from concerns about the loss of cultural identity. For many Eurosceptics, the push for a more united Europe threatens national traditions, languages, and ways of life. They argue that the EU should focus on being an economic union rather than trying to shape a European identity that overrides national identities. Economic policy is also a major sticking point. Countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Poland, which have opted not to adopt the euro at once, have expressed concerns about further economic integration, fearing that it could lead to greater financial obligations or risks associated with eurozone instability. These countries want to maintain control over their own currencies and economic policies, and they are wary of moves toward a more unified fiscal policy. A key factor in the future of EU integration will be the role played by its institutions: the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Council, and the European Court of Justice. The European Commission, as the executive arm of the EU, often pushes for deeper integration. It proposes legislation, manages the EU budget, and ensures that EU laws are applied consistently across member states. The Commission has been at the forefront of calls for a stronger EU as a response to global challenges, whether that's through a digital single market, climate policy, or COVID-19 recovery efforts. The European Parliament, which is directly elected by EU citizens, represents a variety of political viewpoints, from those who want deeper integration to those who advocate for more national control. In recent years, we've seen an increase in Eurosceptic parties gaining seats in the Parliament, which reflects the growing diversity of opinions on the future of the EU. The European Council, made up of national leaders, tends to be where the biggest debates over sovereignty versus integration take place. While some leaders, like France's Emmanuel Macron, have called for more EU integration, others, such as Hungary's Viktor Orban, have resisted any moves towards a more centralized EU. And finally, the European Court of Justice plays a crucial role in ensuring that EU law is upheld across member states. However, its rulings can also be a source of tension, particularly in countries like Poland and Hungary, where governments have clashed with the EU over issues like judicial independence and rule of law. These disputes have raised questions about how much power the EU should have in influencing what they call internal affairs of its member states. While the debate often focuses on the extremes, either deeper integration or more national sovereignty, there's also a third option that's increasingly being discussed: flexible integration. Flexible integration means that not all member states need to integrate at the same speed or the same degree. And this concept, sometimes referred to as a multi-speed Europe, allows countries to opt into or out of certain areas of integration depending on their national interests. For example, some countries have chosen not to adopt the euro, while others have opted out of certain aspects of EU law, such as the Schengen area or judicial cooperation. This model could offer a compromise, allowing those countries that want deep integration to move forward, while giving more skeptical countries the ability to maintain greater control over their policies. However, this approach comes with its own challenges, particularly around maintaining unity and preventing a divided or fragmented EU. So, where does the EU go from here? The future of EU integration will likely be shaped by several key factors, and its first, external challenges that continue to play a role. The EU will need to adapt to a changing global landscape, including the rise of China, shifting relations with the United States, and the challenges posed by climate change, migration, and the technological disruption. These global issues could push the EU toward deeper cooperation in areas like defense, climate policy, and digital governance. Second, internal dynamics will shape the future. As long as there are member states pushing back against further integration, there will be ongoing debates about how the balance between national sovereignty and centralized EU power. Elections in key member states, the growth of Eurosceptic parties, and public opinion will all influence this balance. And finally, the EU's own institutions will need to evolve to remain effective in addressing both internal divisions and external pressures. Whether that means reforming the decision-making process, changing the way EU funds are distributed, or creating new mechanisms for resolving disputes between member states, the EU will need to adapt to the realities of a more complex and diverse union. In the end, the future of EU integration remains uncertain. Will the EU continue on the path of closer union, strengthening its institutions and creating a more unified European identity? Or will we see a shift towards more national sovereignty, where member states regain more control over their own policies? Well, the answer may lie somewhere in between. As the EU faces new challenges, it will likely need to find ways to balance the desire for deeper cooperation with respect for national diversity. What's clear is that the debate over the future of EU integration will continue to shape Europe for years to come. So, thank you for watching, and if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more discussions on European politics and with it some global issues. And let me know in the comments where you think the future of EU integration is headed: a closer union or more national sovereignty. And if you want to see another video, the next one is right here in the end screen.